one of the challenges I think I remember from the Worms days looking at the footage was how these worms are very small and not as detailed. Were you
Mhm.
involved in the process of turning them into like more animated and more lively characters, cute, whatever you want to call
Well,
it?
as we went forward from Worms One, there was a real drive to keep the simplicity and the immediacy of the game. Because when you're playing with teams, and it's a very UK thing to take teams to take turns to play. We have bowling in the States, and people take turns doing that, and then it's a very social kind of drinking
Yeah,
type in
right.
between thing. But in video games, people want to go click click click. I'm playing, right? And so Worms has always been a difficult one for the American audience, and also because it was 2D and pixelated, and that was its charm. But people thought of it as a limitation. It was designed that way so that you could get as much land as possible with as least amount of pixels to depict the character as possible. And that was Andy Davidson. And I think he struck a great balance with the size of the characters versus the zooming in and out and the whole thing. I think it was absolutely amazing. But when we went to Worms 2, we wanted to keep that. And the guy's name was Carl. And there was a bunch of other people that were working on Worms 2. But he pushed for the Oxford animation Animo. I can't remember. Anyway, it was an expensive vector-based animation system, which then you'd animate them as vectors. Oxford something or other. It was popular at the time, but then scale it down and then rasterize it for different resolutions and different platforms. And that way, we could really eke out. The subtle movements would be real pixel flickers that would work in our benefit. But it was so. So when we went to Worms 2, it was really keeping that scale of them maybe a bit bigger and be a bit more visible, but more zooming in and out. But they worked tirelessly to find that balance of let's not just go 3D because everything else is going 3D. In fact, the first time Worms went 3D, it was not. I don't
Many
think
years later. Many
it was
years
many
later.
years later.
Yeah.
And excuse me, and I don't think it was the best implementation. Now they've got a different implementation, and now they've favored going back between 3D and 2D and all that kind of stuff. And the it's like, what's the benefit of going 3D? Does it need to be 3D? If this is a side-on thing and it's about these distances and things like that, it's like it's got to. The core of it was a 2D game. How you manipulate that and make it still be cell shaded. Where I was involved was, okay, these things are looking very cell shaded, like little inked in cartoons. How can you take that and do that in 3D, but then maintain that cell shaded look? And Lightwave had a couple of plugins and its own built-in system for doing cell shading, and it straight off the bat it worked great. And so I redesigned. I didn't design the first character, and even the actual worm on the first animated ones was that John built that. But it was plagued. We had animation and also modeling issues because we couldn't even like the armpit. We had these problems with trying to rebuild something and with time. So when I went to doing the next one, I built it from scratch, and it was based on the new worm that's in Worms 2, the updated one. And then I built a much more robust animation system of IK and the eyebrows and the eyes and all that kind of stuff. So you could really just concentrate on animating.
How does
So
that
I
work?
concentrated on the.
If you don't mind me interrupting you, how does it work when that kind of stuff happens? Do you have an artist first that hand draws like what a worm would look like, and then you have someone that digitally creates it, and then you have someone that creates a model for it in 3D? How does the process work?
Well, in that process, it being a young company, it was probably different because we had lots of different people pitching in different ideas, different artists. But I think the artist that was working the Animo system. Oh, is it Animo? Did I just say
Animo? Maybe you.
I don't know.
Struggled, yeah. I'll look it up in the edit.
Oxford Animation System, something. I think it was him that actually designed it. But I'd have to look back at that. So the guy that was actually animating it was the guy that was building it. As they were building it in 2D, it was allowing them to animate it anyway. It's the same system for building it. So I think they designed, but I'm thinking I'm missing out a vital step of who actually did the main graphics at that part.
Because I'm thinking that's an iconic design, right? There's some things that are very iconic.
Oh, yeah.
The original Worms is a very iconic design, just like any like Disney property to me, in my mind at least.
Sure, but if you look at the art boxes and also the intro animations for the original Worms and Worms 2, You will see Rory Little had his implementation. He's lovely. Rory Little, I think he's still at Team 17. And there was also Rory McLeish. And Rory McLeish was very
Rory
big.
Little Rory, yeah.
And Big Rory and Little Rory is fantastic. So bless him. He's such a lovely, they're both lovely gentlemen. But he had his own style of doing stuff. Rory Little came from traditional art, and then we changed him over to digital art. And he took over a lot of the techniques that really favored painting in Photoshop back then. He did a great job. But then there was another guy called Craig, who was a 3D animator, and one of his intro animations made it in at some point, and his was a totally different style. Really? And then they also sent it to the States for the US, and then they did their own branding and totally different as well. So we had the UK artwork, which had 3 different styles internally, and then the American artwork. And so after then, I think they really started to, right, no, we've got to have a unified thing, because this is crazy. So now it's totally unified and totally, it's a 20 years later company. They're very, very organized and structured. But at the beginning, there was a lot of like, who's got the best ideas and the loudest voice at that point. But they saw sense, and I think the design that's in the game is one style, and then I tried to emulate that as much closely as I could for the FMV sequences. In that, but it was never a clean path, I think. But we're all so young.
Sure, of course. What do you think made Worms such a special and successful franchise that to this day is thriving?